Welcome to the Accountants Exposed podcast, where we create light bulb moments for our listeners by exposing the journeys, secrets, and insights of some of the top players in accounting. This podcast is brought to you by Michael Edelstein, Director and Founder of Recruitment Expert, a specialist accounting recruitment agency working across Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific. Hope everyone has had a great start to the new year, which is well and truly in full swing. Today I'm really pleased to have Chris Hooper, the accounting futurist, on our podcast. Chris has been in the industry for over 14 years now and used to be the director of the Future Accountants Network, an organization on a mission to educate tomorrow's accountants, as well as being the director for Startup Adelaide and an academic at Adelaide's universities. Not to mention his journey building a global accounting practice. He's a regular on the speaker circuit and also consults to accounting practices to help them modernize their firms. He's taken home a lot of awards and has had an immense amount of experience in the industry, with many successes and some failures that we can all learn from a lot. I certainly learned a lot. I hope you do as well. Please enjoy. Hello, Chris. Welcome to the Accountants Exposed podcast. Now, I'm really glad you can join us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, you've had this whirlwind of a journey over the last 14 years, from a cadet in a reputable Adelaide firm to becoming a partner in your early 20s, I believe, to then amalgamating multiple accounting technology firms into one company, going global, planning to list on the ASX, getting venture capital funding for it all, and then came all crashing down at the end of last year. So there's definitely a lot to talk about there.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I was going to say, let's go back to the beginning. Now, the young aspiring accountant, Chris. What made you get into accounting straight out of high school?
Mainly because I was interested in business. I had a whole bunch of side hustles going on through high school. And I think I was really good at the business part, but, pretty average at the, I guess the accounting side of things. And I'd once heard that, accounting was the language of business, and I felt like I was kind of illiterate in my teens. So that was kind of what prompted me to go there and, learn how to do all of that.
Okay. It's actually the same reason why I went into accounting as well. The language of business aspect definitely resonates with me. And it's great, especially when you get into audit, which was my cadetship. You definitely get a lot of exposure to CEOs and CFOs as a little 17-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And learn your credits and debits before you even start uni, which is crazy. What sort of side hustles were you into at uni?
So the first one was like professional wrestling, and that business is still actually running here in Adelaide. I got out of it at like 15, but the Basso brothers, who kind of pioneered it, kept going with it, and it's still running today under the name of Riot City Wrestling. And
as in bringing wrestlers for an event, or actually you wrestling and charging for it?
WWE. So the training side, was a I guess revenue stream, and then obviously the events in terms of ticket sales and merchandise and food and drink and all of that sort of stuff, that was a revenue stream.
And you were 15 at that time?
Well, I was 13 when it all started, and I left it about 15 or 16.
Wow. Okay. Very cool.
It
Not
was
something
super dodgy, man. A bunch of 13-year-old kids teaching actually charging money to teach other 13-year-old kids how to beat the snot out of each other. And the gym that we were actually training out of was nice enough to actually let us host an exhibition match at one of their kickboxing meetups.
Was it after watching Fight Club?
No, this was before Fight Club even came out as a movie, man. This was just from watching all the WWF, back in the 90s.
Actually, you're right. I remember as a kid, I was definitely addicted to that stuff as well. Wow, very cool. Any other cool side hustles besides that one?
Well, the wrestling thing kind of spun out into the gym, fitness, personal training type thing. So I went to the Australian Institute of Fitness at 15 to sort of get all my PT creds and all of that sort of stuff, and was running like a dodgy gym operation out of my parents' shed at the time, which was good fun and super dodgy. So those were probably the main two that occupied my time at high school.
Very cool. Did any of them actually make money?
I mean, they all made money, but by by nowadays standards, not much, but by like a 15-year-old kid's standard, I was like, the highest income
Gold
kid
mine.
in school. Yeah, because I was working at Big W almost 30 or 40 hours a week as well. Plus, the extra
Yeah.
$200 or $300 a week I was, getting from the PT stuff. So I was bringing in like, $500 to $700 a week as a 15, 16-year-old kid, which is a lot of money for a kid.
Pretty damn good, especially back then,
Yeah.
and especially in Adelaide.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you know much about accounting? Like, out of all
No, no,
the
no, no. I was
kind
really good at making money and really good at spending it.
of, because like, did someone give you the idea to go, hey, you should apply for cadetships? Like, there's accounting firms. Like, I didn't know until someone told
Well,
me that there's
the
accounting firms that
way
do cadetships.
I got onto that, right, was that when I, shut down my dodgy gym operation in my parents' shed, I actually started working, salary wise out of like a legit gym.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the members there when I was actually, got to go back a step. So after I was talking to a mate of mine, she was also a personal trainer. And, she said, Chris, it's been a fun year, because she did it in a gap year, like the training thing after high school. It's been a
Mm-hmm.
fun year, but, I've got to get on the straight and narrow. I'm going to go to uni next year, blah, blah, blah. And we were just sitting at the pub talking. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. What are you studying? And she's like, accounting. I'm like, accounting. Tell me more about that, And then she sort of gave me the lowdown on it and all of that. And I remember going home and kind of reading more about accounting, and then Googling like how to get into high school without year 12. Oh no, how to get into university without year 12. And there was a pretty, clear pathway for me to get into university, into an accounting degree through like the vet track, so to speak, with a diploma
Mm-hmm.
of business. So yeah, basically once that was done, the course was set in motion. I was enrolled and I'd resigned from the gym, and I was saying goodbye to members and stuff like that. And there was one girl in particular, Carly, who when I said goodbye to her, she reached into her handbag and gave me a business card, and it said like senior accountant on it. And she's like, call me after your first week at school. And I did. And I caught up with her repeatedly. And she was the one who told me that I had to get a foot in the door, early in accounting. That's what she did. And it worked, exceptionally well. I think she was only 24 at the time when I was 19. And she was already a senior at a mid-tier firm and doing exceptionally well. I think she's the CFO of a publicly listed company now.
Okay. So a thanks to her, basically.
Yeah.
And did you know like you wanted to get into audit or tax, or
at
just
that
whatever
stage,
they put
it
you
was
into?
like a foot in the door. I think the saying was, it doesn't matter if you're like, mopping the floors in the toilets of an accounting firm, at least you're in there, and I think that's a really
You're in
important.
corporate Australia.
Yeah, like I think that's an important attitude. Like you just have to be in, because if you're in the same room as them, you're networking and you're learning and you're making connections and all of that sort of stuff. She also told me that I would learn more in my first week, on the job than I would in my first year at uni. And she was absolutely right about that, I think.
I second that. And what did you end up doing? Were you in tax? Were you in audit? Were you
So
in
yeah,
super? What was
I
your?
started out in tax. But
Mhm.
I think it was important for me, and again at Carly's behest, to rotate around as many sort of areas of the practice as I possibly could, rather than kind of getting stuck and progressing through one. And I think that came at the expense of some sort of career advancement, because obviously if you start in tax and then you just double down on tax and study real hard in tax and
Yeah.
do lots of tax, in 4 years' time, you'll probably be a pretty good senior tax accountant, whereas I kind of, spent a year in tax and then moved over to audit for a little while, and then did some time in superannuation and so forth. Even did some time in like
Mhm.
management accounting type stuff. And I think for me, that was very important in terms of becoming a well-rounded accountant, because somewhere between those 4 years at that firm, I had kind of come to the conclusion that I was going to start my own practice. And then I was thinking about, okay, well, what do I need to learn in order to do that from a technical standpoint? And that was like, okay, cool, I need to move around every single area of, your typical practice in order to be a well-rounded sole practitioner.
Yeah. What made you, I guess, or what sparked that thought that, you know what, I think I'll start my own accounting practice one day?
Because I understood how good the accounting business was. If you rewind and go, here's Chris, little entrepreneur, wants to learn accounting to just be better at business, right? I get into an accounting firm to do my like apprenticeship, so to speak, and then I realize how good the business is there. And if I've got a choice as a 22, 23-year-old between starting a gym, let's say, versus starting an accounting practice, well, I know which one's going to make me more money at the end of the day. So I think me deciding to open a practice was the realization about how good the accounting profession is from a business standpoint in terms of profitability and cash flow, and also salability. It blew my mind that accounting practices basically sell for dollar of revenue. Like don't even need to look at the P&L. You just look at the top line, and that's the value of the firm. And I think that really encouraged me as I was starting out, because you'd sign on like a new $1,000 a year client or something like that. But it wasn't actually just $1,000 a year in additional revenue that you were bolting onto the practice. It was $1,000 in goodwill, as an asset that you had essentially created out of thin air. And I think that was when like to be real, man, there was a moment there for a year or two where I was actually booking internally generated goodwill on the balance sheet of the practice so that I could actually see that number going up.
It's a good way to think about it. I don't think many accountants will look at it that way. Well, I certainly didn't. Where
to recognize internally generated goodwill, are you? But like you see that strength in the balance sheet, and you're like, yeah, damn, this is a good business. To be clear, like it's a highly liquid industry in terms of sales. You can sell a whole practice pretty quickly with very little marketing compared to every other business transaction I've been involved in on buy side and sell side. Accounting firms just sell real quick.
That's very true. Especially, look, the good ones in capital cities and regional areas, they still go for like 60 cents to 80 cents in a dollar, but in metro, $1 for $1.10 these days.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy when I see the north of $1. That's nuts, isn't it?
What would you advise school leavers these days, people that are thinking of what to do with their lives / potentially considering a career, in business, finance, etc.? Is that a path they should follow, the whole cadetship thing, or?
Look, absolutely, the cadetship thing. I think that applies not just in accounting, but in any business, any profession. I think it's weird that in, TAFE world or vet world, let's say you're becoming a plumber, you go to school to learn plumbing, but then you're also learning on the job through your apprenticeship. Why we don't have apprenticeships in the legal profession, in the accounting profession, in the journalism profession, et cetera, is, I'm just at a bit of a loss. We're supposed to spend 3 to 4 years at university and then go out and look for a job with no skills, because when you think about it from the employer's perspective, whether you hire someone fresh out of high school or fresh out of university, they're probably still going to be about as useless to you as each other out of the first year. Maybe the first year out of uni will learn a bit quicker than the high school kid, but you've still got that lost year basically in training and the learning curve.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of kids these days do the whole internship thing during summer and stuff like that, but or work experience
which
for a couple of months.
I'm a big fan of as well. Like if you can't get a job or a cadetship at a firm, do your summer internship, or like Carly said, like mop the floors at the accounting firm. Like it doesn't matter.
Get in there.
Get in, and waiting till graduation is the worst thing that you could possibly do.
And what would you say, like for a typical high schooler or even graduate, the options that they have? There's two things that they kind of have to decide. One is Big Four, mid-tier, or like small firm, and two, audit or tax. How would you go about navigating those decisions if you were in their shoes? Or what advice would you give them?
I think it depends on sort of what the end game is. If you want to be a partner of a Big Four, in fact, no, I'll retract that, because I know someone who basically leapfrogged from small tier into top tier as part of her strategy to end up in Big Four. It was very impressive, the moves that she made there. So you don't have to go straight to Big Four. And then vice versa, you can go from Big Four to smaller tier. So you know what? I would probably say, when I think about the people that I know in the profession that have moved between, I don't think it's that big a decision. I don't think it's that important a decision in terms of whether you go, Big Four, mid-tier, or bottom tier. I would say that smaller firms are actually easier to get into than big firms, because when I
Mm.
asked my students, at university, name as many accounting firms as you possibly could, at best I'd get 10 accounting firms. I'm like, how many accounting firms do you
Yeah.
think there are in the country? And no one is applying for jobs, at Joe Bloggs and Associates, So you've got a
Mm.
decent opportunity of getting a job at Joe Bloggs and Associates, basically just cold calling them, and building a relationship
Yeah.
with the team and the partners there, than you would, just another resume on a pile at PwC. So I think it probably is easier to go where the competition isn't and sneak your way into smaller firms. And I think just on that as well, I think that the learning experience is vastly different between the two. I think that the Big Four have got very structured education and training programs in place that give you a very sort of like holistic, like well-rounded education that doesn't miss a single thing. Whereas I think
Mm.
the partner interaction that you get at smaller firms, you can't get at the Big Four. As a 19, 20-year-old kid, I was spending just an eye-watering amount of time with partners and with senior associates at my firm, and I just wouldn't get an opportunity to speak with people that knowledgeable and that experienced in the Big Four that early on. You know what I mean? Because they've just got more layers of management.
Yeah. No, 100% agree. And I don't know if you'd agree with this. I think that's pros and cons to both, which is what you mentioned. I
Absolutely.
think if you go for the Big Four, you get the Big Four in your CV and you get the better training probably, but you are more pigeonholed
Absolutely. I
into
think,
an
yeah, that's
area.
a good point.
Like even if you're doing one thing I always tell to my candidates is like, look, if you go into Big Four, not only you pigeonholed into like audit, but you're pigeonholed into financial services of audit, and all you'll be doing is banks, especially
Yeah.
in the large
Yeah.
capitals. Adelaide less
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So specific
If you're doing
industries.
tax, yeah, if you're doing tax, you might just end up in the GST team, and all you'll be doing for the next 10 years is GST, which is
Absolutely.
completely the opposite of your approach, which is becoming a well-rounded accountant. And so you get a lot better exposure in smaller firms. So I think a mid-tier is a good compromise where you get kind of good exposure,
Absolutely.
good training, bit of both, and you still get a good name on your CV. So
Yeah, I think
that's
if
usually my
corporates
advice.
recognize the name, if let's say that you want to go work at a publicly listed company, if the finance manager or CFO or whoever recognizes the name of the firm on the resume, and it doesn't have to be Big Four, I think that helps your prospects if the plan is to end up in corporate.
Yeah, like your RSMs and BDOs, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
So you finished uni, you finished your CA, and then you went into commerce for a while. Why the transition?
I wanted to put some space between, I guess, my old practice and starting a new practice, mostly out of respect for the partners there. So
Okay.
I didn't want to leave on the, I'm quitting and I'm starting my own practice note, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think it conjures up, being escorted out of the business by security guards and, all of that sort of stuff. I had no interest in sort of quote unquote stealing clients or anything like that. I was going to do everything sort of the hard way. And yeah, so it was mostly out of respect for the partners that I, took the cliched route of going like, oh yeah, I got a job in corporate. And nobody contends with that or disputes it because they know that corporate pays almost twice as much as public, and they're like, cool, congratulations, good luck. And then
Good luck.
spent
All the
about
best.
I spent a year or two. Well, you could imagine it would have been a vastly different conversation if I said I'm quitting to start a practice,
100%.
So yeah, like that. I spent a year or two there, and I learned a few more things while I was there, which I think, I don't regret the time spent there. And I think it also bought me a lot of time to sort of to contemplate and actually start making active moves to setting up the practice. Because when I'm working in
Mm-hmm.
commerce, I suddenly have no conflict of interest. Does that make sense? So I'm not like conspiring to start an accounting firm while I'm working for an accounting practice. I'm working for, a rail freight company, who couldn't care less if I'm starting an accounting practice on the side, at nights and weekends.
What was your experience like in commerce, and especially with the backdrop of coming out of an accounting firm? Because it's a transition that many people contemplate and then do.
It was awesome, especially working for Downer Group, which like for their rail division. So I think Downer has like 20,000 people working for it. So it's a huge company, and their
Mm.
rail company is just a small section of that. And, maintenance was a smaller section of a smaller section of a business unit. My office was kind of like a tin shed attached to a workshop. So on site, you had maybe like 10 white collared staff and then like 190 blue collared staff.
Yep.
So it was a completely different experience to what I'd been used to, like working in heavy industry. And,
Did you
I
see
had
any of
ownership.
your Did you see any of your ex WWF, colleagues there?
No, no.
No.
Um, but, it was interesting just seeing, I guess, the the commercial implications of your work, if that makes sense. For example, a locomotive would, derail or crash, right? And you'd be doing part of the insurance claim on behalf of the client. You would see photos of the crash and, the accident and all of that. And then you'd spend the next 3 weeks kind of like itemize the damage, talking to engineers and estimators and all of that sort of stuff. And it was interesting, I guess, seeing that cause and effect. And I think you don't get to see that working on clients, if that makes sense. You've got a very bird's eye view
Hmm.
in public practice working on clients, because you only see, the final figures in the
The final
general ledger.
outcome.
Correct. Whereas I guess working in commerce, you see every transaction and you care about every transaction that goes through the general ledger. I would have situations where I'd spend 30 minutes talking about a $200 charge to the work in progress register, because for me, in the context of my role, that was material. For a public practice accountant working in audit or tax or wherever, that's not material. Nobody cares. It's a rounding error. But in commerce, the materiality shrinks right down.
Did it actually help you become a better accountant and especially a better practitioner once you did open up your own firm?
I think in terms of like commercial acumen, let's call it, particularly from like a listed public company perspective, it did, in terms of the corporate governance and all of that sort of thing.
Hmm.
I think it really was the missing piece to, I guess, becoming a well-rounded accountant, was that time in commerce. I don't think it was essential to my work in public practice, but it certainly felt like let's call it the cherry on top of my early career.
Okay. So what would you advise like an accountant, say a young accountant that's actually pretty much every every accountant ends up in that same spot where they've got their 3 years, they've done their CA, and they're thinking, cool, I've got my CA, what's next? A lot of my friends have moved to commerce, they're paying more, I'm kind of tired of doing timesheets. Should I move
Yeah,
to
that's a big one.
commerce slash government, or should I, stay around and progress and maybe become a partner or a manager or something? What are the factors to take into account, and how do you go around once again navigating that decision? What do you take into account? How do you make that?
I think money and lifestyle are probably the most important considerations that go into that. Working in commerce was
Hmm.
amazing in terms of finishing at 5 o'clock. you know, like for me, I had to leave at 5 o'clock. It was kind of like a work health safety thing that I left on that shift. There was a change of shift in the factory, and the company was real big on, what applies to the blue collar applies to the white collar. You know, so I meant that
Interesting.
had some
Okay.
like that downside of, I guess, the drug testing and the physicals. So I needed to get a yearly physical. I needed to do a physical to even get the job, which was insane because it's a white collar job. And the doctor joked at me saying,
Yep.
this is in case a locomotive, crashes through your office. We need to see if you're fit enough to jump out of the way. It,
Yep.
it was obviously a joke, but it was this philosophy that they had at the company that meant like what applies to the blue collar applies to the white collar, because it was a super
Hmm.
unionized industry. And
By the way,
I don't know
I
how.
think we should point out that I think we should point out to everyone, just because like you go into commerce does not mean you will finish at 5. I think, Chris, you had an exceptional set of
No,
circumstances
I
there.
think I think by and large, your odds of finishing at 5 o'clock are much higher in commerce than they are in public. Let's put it that way.
That is true. Yeah.
Look, I
More
like, and
likely than
I can
less
attest.
likely, as they say in order, right?
Correct. More likely than less likely. Look, and I do know some crazy mofos that do work in commerce, and they still work public hours. And I guess more power to them. Or maybe they should reassess some decisions. But look, I think money and lifestyle are important decisions. I think lifestyle is better in commerce. I think there's less stress, and I think there is a higher chance of you knocking off at 5 o'clock. Money wise, the money is initially better in commerce. So there's this like little sugar hit that you get when you transition out. But when you kind of look forward in terms of career trajectory, your odds of becoming CFO, which is like the $250,000 plus sort of territory, your odds of becoming CFO are pretty thin, because let's say the pyramid in the org chart gets very thin at the pointy end, Whereas when you look at public practice, I think there is a higher chance of becoming a partner and earning $250K a year in a public accounting firm. But obviously, you're going to have to work the hours for a long time in order to actually achieve that.
Okay. It's good insight. What would you say on the flip side? What are the downsides of moving to commerce? If there are any, actually.
No, there are downsides, absolutely. I think the first one is that you're pretty much like the only accountant there. You know what I mean? Like, in public accounting, you're surrounded by accountants, so I think the learning is better. Whereas in commerce, there are other accountants, but they're all like specialized into their little thing, So you've got the person from AR, you've got the person from AP, the person from payroll, the person from, contracts or whatever. Like, so they've all got their little corner of the sky. So I don't think it's as easy to get sort of like, I guess, the same level of mentoring and camaraderie or peer support that you would in public accounting, because in public accounting, you can spin your chair around and go, hey, Joe, what do you think of this? Be it a tax problem or whatever. You can't do that in commerce, unless you're in a huge company where you have a tax team of like, 100 people. You can't get that kind of like brains trust, let's call it.
Okay. Is there anything else?
No, I'd probably say that was the only thing I really missed, moving from public to commerce.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, you obviously chose to do CA. The other big decision that I wanted to kind of run past you is CA or CPA. I get asked that a lot by candidates.
I did not get a choice in the matter, and most people don't.
I didn't think you would. Yep. Yeah. Does it matter though, like from your experience? And because I know if you do work for CA,
I'm not even a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. I got my graduate diploma, and then I got the membership form, and I'm like, do I actually need? And I asked them, I'm like, do I actually need this to practice as an accountant? No, you don't. You need your tax agent license, but you don't need your CA.
Yep.
Because I read through, and I guess a lot of people don't, but I read through all of their bylaws and stuff like that, and it's like, I don't agree with half of these. Why would I sign up to it?
Which bylaws?
Like,
do you not agree with?
The ones in particular, the one that says I must maintain a partnership of over 50% chartered accountants in order to be a chartered accounting firm. And at this stage, I was contemplating going into business with my best friend Marcus, who was not a chartered accountant. He was a bookkeeper by trade. So I was already, breaking the bylaws from day one. And, then it kind of clicked as to why I got kind of forced into doing CA. Because if you want, if it's a CA firm, you're going to be forced into doing CA, and you won't even get a look in at CPA, because they have to satisfy that bylaw. Like, if you're a CPA and you're working for a CA firm, like, your odds of becoming a partner of that firm are infinitely smaller, and then vice versa. So if you're at a CPA firm and you're a CA, your odds of being a partner. Actually, I don't know that. I don't know if CPA's got that in their bylaws. I imagine they would be, but they are certainly in the CAs. So yeah, I guess that was my take on that. In terms of picking which one, it's like, it really depends on the firm that you're at.
Okay. Are there any benefits doing one over the other that you
I don't think
consider?
So. I don't think clients really care. I don't think employers in commerce care. You see it in all of the job adverts, don't you? CA/CPA.
Yeah, or CPA.
But they don't care. Clients definitely don't care. The only people that care are the people in your firm, the other CAs or the other CPAs. So I think that's what will be the deciding factor. Yeah, and that's kind of my take on it.
No, I appreciate it. And I think, look, it's true. At the end of the day, your clients don't give a damn. Like, if you can do the job and you give them good advice and you save them some money on tax, they're happy. They don't care whether you could be an NIA for all they care. Now, you mentioned you joined up with your best friend Marcus. Tell us a bit more about that, because I mean, obviously, even throughout commerce, you were there for 2 years. You always had the practice on your mind. So, was that something you guys have been talking about for a while now? Or is that sort of sparked
No,
over
it
a
was
drink
kind of
at the
like
pub?
a, yeah, very much actually repairing Mark's dad's fence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Julio was talking. He'd run a bookkeeping practice for probably 20 odd years, which Marcus was working for, and
It was just the two of them.
Julio. Sorry.
It was
Yeah,
just the two of them. Okay.
correct. And Julia was saying, I'm thinking of selling the practice. And I just immediately, I didn't even think about it. I just immediately said, sell it to us. I didn't even put any thought into it. And that's kind of, how that sort of, expanded from there. So we kind of started, our first year in practice with a small tranche of fees of the clients of Julio's that were actually ready and willing to come over. And then I guess similarly, it actually created a nice, easy off ramp for Julio. So it wasn't just this line in the sand, boom, he's retired. It just gradually wound down his hours as Marcus and I started winding up ours.
Mm-hmm. So it was a gradual transition. It wasn't like you left down and then you started straight away.
Yeah. So I think it was really good for all concerned in that respect.
Okay, but you transitioned. Like it wasn't like you left your commerce role and then went straight into it. It was like a ramp
No,
up.
so I'd actually started taking fees probably halfway through that commerce role. That was kind of when the succession plan really sort of started kicking in. I can't remember specifics of the timeline, but I know that they overlap.
Okay. And what do you think about like this whole idea of getting into partnership with one of your friends? Because I mean, there's a partnership, and I've been in a business partnership. It's kind of like marriage. It's got its good and bad
very,
elements
very
to
careful.
it.
I would say very.
How would you
careful.
advise how would you advise navigating that relationship and making sure you said be careful, but like what should you be aware of and what should be put in place to protect you or ensure its success?
I don't know, because I've had more failed partnerships than I've had successful ones. I think I got lucky with Marcus, and that was because we went through primary school and secondary school together. So I'd known him for 15 odd years, prior to going into business with him. We were always involved in like these sketchy little side hustles in high school together. And I think there was just a very clear relationship from the get-go. And we don't even have a partnership agreement between the two of us. It's all just done on a handshake. And I think much to our wives' dismay, like I'll just hand Marcus $500, out of the blue. And it's like, because it's the same money. We don't care. He'll fix me up later type thing,
Mm-hmm.
So, and we've always kind of had that relationship, and we still do. But that was a total fluke. There was no like thought or foresight or planning with the partnership agreement or anything like that into it. And then conversely, I've had very highly structured partnerships with hundreds of pages of legal documents and tens of thousands of dollars lawyer fees that have gone to absolute shit, and those contracts are only as good as your ability to litigate them. And I think people need to know that yeah, you can get a contract drawn up for $1,000, and it's like trademarks and patents. You can get a trademark, but can you afford the $100,000 it's going to cost to litigate that trademark if someone, breaks it? Probably not. So I don't think I have an answer to that question.
Okay. So there's nothing that you would advise a young aspiring accountant wants to go out on their own, potentially with a friend, potentially join a partnership?
My advice would be don't do it. I think if in doubt, don't do it.
Okay. As in the alternative, go for the alternative, which is start out on your own?
Go out on your own.
Okay.
Work with people. And I work with plenty of people, but I don't have to be in partnership with them. You just work with people and do it on a very commercial basis. You just don't need to be in partnership with people anymore. Yeah, and it's that simple.
Okay. Well, I remember that was kind of one of the essences of the whole business plan behind a codex, right? Bringing a whole bunch of sole practitioners together.
Uniting the sole practitioners. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, how did you guys, I guess, you had clients from the bookkeeping, but then converting them into compliance clients, which I think is what you told me is how you decided to grow the practice. Just tell us, like, you're what, in your early 30s, 23, 24, probably at this stage?
Yeah, 24, let's say.
How do you go out and get clients and convince them to come aboard? Being a young bloke competing with partners of, the big four, the small, or the mid-tier firms, etc. How do you convince a client to come on board with you and do all the tax work
I
and
think
have that credibility?
as a bookkeeping firm, and I think accountants need to be very aware of this, is that a client sees their bookkeeper once a week, at worst once a month. They see their tax accountant maybe once a year, at best twice a year.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to, I guess, infiltrate that relationship as the bookkeeper and go, hey, we do tax now. I see the old mate's charging you 4,000, we'll charge you 3. What do you say? You can appreciate how many times we got told no, not that many. So it's really easy for,
because it's a commodity, right? Like
correct.
Yeah,
so
because especially it's a commodity.
Yep. Rob Nixon used to say it's like buying petrol, right? So you don't look at the petrol gauge in your car on empty and go, yay, I get to go buy some petrol. You go, oh, crap, I've got to go buy petrol. And then you start looking at the signs around the servos and go, well, what's the cheapest?
Yep.
Or what's the closest, or what's the most convenient? Nobody looks for value for, what I mean, like quality or value for money in petrol. They look for price and convenience. So yeah, it's pretty easy for the bookkeeper to grab the compliance work.
Okay.
So there's that. And then, I was heavily involved in the technology sort of startup scene in Adelaide. And I had a lot of friends that owned, small software development shops and web dev shops and stuff like that. And it was pretty easy for me to get them on board as well, because they felt like their accountant didn't even understand what business that they were in. And I did, So the clients that I got on my own sort of volition that weren't sort of Julio's bookkeeping clients were the clients just in the tech scene in Adelaide, that startup scene. Because you've got to remember, this was 2011, man, and we were a 100% cloud firm with a tax offering in the tech sector for all of these new companies. So it wasn't difficult to sort of win clients in that respect. So I think, the takeaway on that for listeners is kind of about picking a niche, which I think is especially important when you're starting out.
Okay. What are some good niches that you would recommend for people starting out now?
I've seen people like, friends, niche into hospitality. Like, I think, that's really good. Like, it's like, I think of
except
one
during
firm in
COVID,
particular.
maybe.
Yeah, I know, right? I don't know how they're doing at the moment, but they only do cafes, and it's like, he's written a book about accounting for cafes. You could just get into that sort of that level of focus, which is nuts. So in terms of what niches are good, I think all niches are good. Like, I think the best niches to pick are ones that you're genuinely interested in. So if you like coffee, if you like coffee and you like spending time at coffee shops, then niche into coffee. If you like cars, right, and hanging around with mechanics and stuff, then go be the accountant that works exclusively for mechanics. It's not, and it's super easy to niche into these things, because all of these industries have got these like super niche trade magazines. So they'll have like Mechanics Monthly or something like that. And the actual ad buy for getting like an A4 ad in Mechanics Monthly, it'll cost you like $500 to get a full A4 ad, So they've got their niche blogs, their niche podcasts, their niche influencers, and all of this sort of stuff. And because it's so niche, the cost of marketing and advertising in those spaces is really cheap. Plus you can actually go in and influence that space yourself. So you can get a speaking position at the, mechanics annual, trade show about how to grow a profitable, mechanic shop. It's really easy to do when you actually start thinking about it. But I think the hardest thing that people find is actually picking one niche in particular. And if you don't pick, then you're basically letting the market pick for you.
And I think you also did the reverse, right? The compliance clients you picked up, you also offer them the bookkeeping to
Yes,
to
absolutely.
increase your revenue on both sides.
Correct.
They say they've been saying for like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years now, bookkeeping is dead because of like all the AI stuff and tech stuff, and when Xero came in, etc. What do you think about that? Because I'm seeing a lot of bookkeeping firms pop up.
Shout out to Paul Messner. Look, I think it's just going to keep going. I've been watching the AI hype train for years, man, and it still hasn't left the station. Look, it will eventually, but like true AI doesn't even exist, man. Um, so yeah, look, I wouldn't classify it as a growth industry, but I wouldn't necessarily call it on the decline either. I certainly wouldn't be ushering my 3-year-old son into that trajectory, because I think in 20 years it might look a little different.
Yep.
But
But
when you think about
there's
tax,
still a place for it.
yeah, absolutely. I think tax is probably safer than bookkeeping is, simply because the government is always just going to change their mind on tax laws, like always. It's the two certainties in life are death and taxes. That is 100% true. So I think if you want a safe career,
Yep.
you either become a mortician or a tax accountant.
We'll go with the tax accountant for now. Sounds a bit
I think it pays better.
more pleasant.
Yeah.
Pays better as well. Easier to get a date. As hard as it is as an
Yeah,
accountant, it's still probably easier than a mortician. Now, in terms of, I guess, the clients, how quickly did you guys grow? Like, as two young blokes, best friends, you had a niche in tech. What was the growth trajectory like?
Insanely quick, like breakneck. You're talking like double/triple revenue every single year for however long it was. So yeah, it was crazy. It was a wild ride, because I think we'd hitched our wagon and we've gotten all of the timing right in terms of what market we were niched into. We were in a super fast growing like market, with a super high tech sort of scalable back end in terms of the technology running the firm. And I think we'd done so much patient planning that we were kind of just ready to sort of break out the gate when we did sort of start getting underway.
So how did you manage that in terms of that growth?
Working long hours all the time.
How long before you guys hired someone?
I couldn't tell you, man. Like within the first year, I'm certain of that.
Okay. And I think you also said like you got Rob Nixon pretty much straight away as well. You put in
So like day
like
zero in the
the
firm,
latest
we were
tech stack.
basically so we were signed. This was back in Rob Nixon's Proactive Accountant Network days. So we were members of the Proactive Accountants Network from sort of day zero when we started, and that was a really good exercise.
Okay, how did it help you? Because it's not common that when you start with nothing, you hand over that much money to like Rob Nixon or any of the other coaches in the industry to help you. But it's obviously made a difference to your firm.
Yeah, 100%. I think I had studied Rob's material for several years prior at my old practice, who had some sort of subscription with him. So I could read all of his sort of ebooks and his podcast and so forth. And I've listened to one particular, teleseminar thing that he did probably 3 or 4 times, before I started my practice. So I think if you think about like the coaching thing as personal training, and if you say starting a practice for you is like, I'm going to run a marathon. You say, okay, cool. This year I'm going to run a marathon. I have no training. I'm at sort of very moderate average fitness. Well, what would you do? And I think one of the things, and it's just one, not all of them, because I could spend time on Google, I could just train, spend lots of time in forums, blah, 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 and just learn how to do it. Or if I want to fast track it, I would get a coach. Yeah. I would get a coach to keep me accountable, and I would get a coach to help me shortcut or like fast track my progress to running that marathon. And I think no one is going to argue with me in any context that I think getting a coach in whatever context is going to help you get the results that you're after quicker, period.
No, it's true. And what were the biggest takeaways, I guess, from having that coaching? Like what helped the most in that particular time period?
I think the accountability helped the most, being accountable to not only the coach, but then also accountability to my team or, the other members of that, that particular group. I think that was probably the most valuable thing. And it's probably worth mentioning that after Rob Nixon, I joined Entrepreneurs Organization, which Rob is also a member of. I think he was the chairman or is still the chairman of the EO Brisbane chapter.
Mm-hmm.
I joined Entrepreneurs Organisation through a program that they call their EO Accelerator program, which basically helps businesses that have got over $250,000 in revenue. I think that was the minimum threshold. And the purpose of the accelerator is to get them to 1 million in revenue. So I was in, EO Accelerator for about 18 months, I think. And that was kind of similar to Rob Nixon, except it was more peer based, so like peer led versus like coach led, if that makes sense.
Okay. Did that get you to your 1 mil quickly?
Yeah, it did in 18 months.
Okay. And in terms of, I guess, the challenges or the pain points, what were the biggest ones? Like growing the firm and that journey is sort of before you went to Codex. So a couple of those, I guess, 3-4 years when you're growing? What were the biggest challenges?
There weren't really any problems, man. In Cirillo Hooper and Company early days, what were the challenges? Probably just workload and managing workload. There was just so much work to do. And I think because I was new to it, half of the time, I guess from a management perspective, I had no idea what I was doing because, 3 years in an accounting degree and then 2 years in CA didn't prepare me for the business management side of things, which is incidentally why I did, that diploma of management that I got on a scholarship halfway through the practice. And then I followed that up with a master's in business because I was grossly unprepared for the business management side of public practice, especially a practice growing that fast. I think if you're growing 20% a year, I think you can manage it because the learning curve is just a little more shallow. But that fast, was just, I think the learning curve was very steep.
But is it the people management side, bringing them on and managing them, or is it the cash flow? Okay. How did you go about hiring? Because I think when you have no brand name, like you're not a PwC or an RSM, one of the biggest issues for accounting firms is actually growing. It's a service industry, right? So you can only grow as fast as you employ people. Just getting the right people on board. What was your approach in A, attracting them, B, retaining them, and growing?
Really good partnerships with all 3 universities. So we offered a very structured intern program, like a summer intern program that had like a full curriculum, and it was very highly regarded by the universities as being sort of like world class. I would argue probably better than what the other firms were offering. And that's why the universities were so keen on, I guess, sending students our way and recommending our program to their students because it was an accredited course. So you would do an internship at Cirillo Hooper and Company and you would get 2 courses of credit on your university degree. I think it was 2 courses.
How did you guys come up with that?
Well, I used to be on the board of Saucner, which is a not-for-profit organisation, with the director of the industry placement program at the University of South Australia. And she asked me if I would take a student, and then we kind of worked together in terms of, I guess, developing that program. And then sort of Flinders University came on and Adelaide University came on. And I think about this in hindsight, and I've actually taught at all 3 universities along that time as well. So I guess in terms of getting, the entry level, like first year or graduate level, that it wasn't that difficult because I would get to pick them from my classes and from the interns that did placements with us. I think we'd probably had over 100 interns actually do placements with us over the last sort of 7 years. So
how do you manage as a fast-growing firm? Because it's a lot of work to manage all of that. Training them, giving them value, even finding time to structure the program.
And HR managers and learning and development managers. So I had overhead non-chargeable staff that were managing the whole process. So I didn't have to do very much at all.
Wow. Okay. And this is because your firm was quite small. You said you only had 5 staff, no?
Yeah, so when
before
it was in the
Codex?
practice, that was me kind of managing it and bumbling my way through and making it up as I went along. Actually, one thing that I did to help develop the program is that I made the interns that were doing the program basically contribute to the development or improvement of the program, if that makes
Structure
sense.
of it.
Yeah, to kind of pay it
Okay.
forward.
Gotcha. So what you're talking about is when you were at a Codex, which was a lot more significant and a much big organization, when you had all the
Mm.
interns and structured programs, etc.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it
Um,
started with like one
now,
intern, every 6 months, to sort of like four at a time type of thing.
hmm. Now you call yourself an accounting futurist. What are the best ideas you've come across, or some that you've implemented, or some that you would implement now if you were in your own firm, or if you were to start a practice?
Look, I think the work from home thing has just been exacerbated by the Rona, and like that is the quote end quote new normal. So I think firms that were 100% cloud didn't even break stride when the Rona came and everyone had to work from home. I think firms that were not prepared for people working at home would have had a very difficult couple of months managing that. What's been crazy to watch is all of the firms like repatriating staff back to the office. I just think that's insane. Like these mid-tier firms
Mm-hmm.
um, have gone, okay, cool, you're working from home for the next 3 months. Okay, cool, the risk is reduced, come back to the office. One, nobody wants to come back to the office after working from home for 3 months. And two, why would you do that? Like, one of your biggest overheads in accounting practice like that is going to be rent and all of the associated costs with that premises. Like, why would you not pass that cost back to your employee when your employee is begging for that? It's just nuts. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, yeah. Look, it's been interesting to watch different firms take different approaches. Some have obviously given the staff the flexibility now, so some they can work from home 1 or 2 days a week or stuff like that. But to be
I just
honest,
don't think
from our
things are going to be the same.
candidates, definitely not. Well, actually, like who knows right now? Everything keeps changing. We don't even know if we're going on holidays anymore. With
Yeah,
because
right.
I'm from Sydney, with the
Yep.
new cluster thing. That's put our holiday plans on potential hold again. But we're seeing from candidates some actually like want to go back to the office. They actually don't like the isolation. They at
Yeah,
least want to
look,
be
I
in the
can
office a
I
few
can
days a week.
understand that in some respects, but I think that the most important thing to sort of take away from that is like 100% cloud is now is a non-negotiable. It's an essential,
Hmm.
and it's like, yeah, you can run some
What's
office
the best
type
tech stack?
arrangement. Look, we were debating
Hmm.
that at dinner last night. I like Zero Tax, Zero Practice Manager, but I also like Lodge IT. I've been using Lodge IT for about a year now with a friend of mine, and it is an absolute joy to use. So I think in Australia, of those two, take your pick.
And what about like workflow, practice management, client engagement, or attraction? Like, what is the ultimate tech stack that you would employ if you were starting out a new firm or growing a firm?
People were debating that at dinner as well. So I caught up with a whole bunch of like a Codex crew partners and staff last night for dinner, and that it was interesting just listening to them debate about what they're using and so forth. I'm not confident sort of giving an answer on that because you've got to balance cost and I guess efficacy. There's a lot of good cheap solutions out there, and there's a lot of really good expensive solutions out there. So it really comes down to sort of like what the comfort in terms of like
What the
that
budget is?
fixed cost. Yeah, absolutely. Because some people because in order to start a practice, you need to have like, at least 10 grand in the bank, to absorb the overheads hit for 6 months. You could probably, to use the top end solutions, you'd need like 50 grand in the bank, because you're going to end up with these software subscriptions that are like $2,000, $3,000 a month just for software if you want the best that's on offer. So
Mm.
I think you've got to balance that, but some things that come to mind, I think Practice Ignition is absolutely essential. That's like a not negotiable. I don't use Carbon, but I've got a colleague that does use Carbon, super highly rated. And yeah, there's a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, you've got to balance out
Okay.
sort of cost versus efficacy.
Okay. Now, to say hindsight is 2020, what would you have done differently in your career or your business?
Probably not gone into business with other people. That's why I say, like, default, I got lucky with Marcus, not so lucky with the others. So I think the default position is don't go into business with other people.
Okay. You're talking about like the Codex getting more partners on board, etc.
No, not the partners,
or
the actual
business
the other
partnerships.
Yeah.
The directors, yeah. That's what I mean. Okay.
I think you don't need to go into partnership with anyone, so why should you? Why would you?
Okay. Chris, I mean, I have a million more questions for you, but I know it's coming up about time.
We are out of time.
So I'll just ask you.
Get out of this hotel. Yep. One more
is
question.
there anything that's had the biggest impact on you? Like, yeah, like what's had the biggest impact on you today? Like a person, a concept, a book, a tool, something that you just either a gift you love, you talk about.
The birth of my son. I think that changed everything in terms of focus and priorities. So I don't know what people can take away from that, but I guess me as a person, I've completely changed in the last sort of 3 years since he's been born, in terms of like, I guess where my focus is. And I think when people are on their deathbeds, I think they don't say, gee, I wish I spent more time at work.
Very true. Chris, I'd love to have you back to finish our conversation, but I know you got to go. So thank you so much for the time today. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll catch up in the new year.
You too. Talk to you later. Bye.
Have a great day. Bye. Thank you for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like our podcast and share it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or wherever it is you hang out so more people can benefit from these speakers. Also, please subscribe on our website so you get all of our latest episodes. And if there's anything else I can help you with, or you have speakers you'd love to hear from, or some feedback about the current episode, please feel free to send an email to michael@recruitmentexpert.com.au. Until then, take care, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.